Hi, I'm Gary Lee Joyner, and this is Atomic Guitar Session 2. In Session 1, I talked a bit about the underlying values, if you will, that guide my approach to all this. And now we're going to start doing some playing. I would guess that you probably have other aspects to your guitar life, a style, acoustic, electric, whatever kind of music, whatever you're doing. And these things can be useful in any of those. You might be just beginning, and this is your initial approach to the guitar. That's great. Maybe you're more advanced and even a teacher, and I think some of these ideas can be a lot of use to you. One of the things when you're more advanced is that you have more framework to hang these ideas from, which is great. But you also have more baggage, so you might want to think about leaving that at the door. For example, that little voice that's saying, "This is too simple. Let's get on to something. Is he really talking that much about that?" And yes, I am. And the thing is, these simple ideas are so fundamental and get overlooked so that we miss some things along the way when we're always looking toward what we don't know yet instead of really thinking about what we do know. And when we're talking about them at such a fundamental atomic level, the landscape is so wide what you can do with it. The more we proceed and refine these things, actually your scope narrows the farther along you go. So always returning to simplicity is a great idea. Tuning. I'm not doing a tuning track. I always think they're the most tedious part of recordings like this. And we're not doing play along here, so it's really not that important that we be precisely in tune. I'm in standard tuning. I used an electronic tuner, and if you get yourself into standard pitch, you'll be close enough. One thing about tuning is a good example of what I'm talking about, not missing the depth of early simple ideas. We all use electronic tuners these days. That's kind of a given, but hopefully along the way you also learned the old simple tuning method of 5th fret compared to the next string over, open. 6th string 5th, open 5th. Yeah, see? Good thing I did that. 5th string 5th fret, open 4th. 4th string 5th fret, open 3rd. 3rd string 4th fret, open 2nd. 2nd string 5th fret, open 1st. And you just match the two strings. Which string you retune depends on which one is your reference note and which way you're moving across the neck. The thing is that we learn that and we move on and think, all right, that's for beginners to know. But in fact, the whole secret of guitar is locked into that process right there. Draw it out, think about it, be aware of it. We'll be referring to that again and again as we proceed in these sessions. And like I said, it's a good example of many things that actually have a lot of treasure in them that we tend to miss. When we talk about guitar, we're talking about making a sound. That's the whole motivation here. That's the point. Whatever style, whatever kind of guitar, however we're doing it alone in front of people, the whole point is to make some noise. But when we start trying to talk to each other about how we're doing it, vocabulary comes in. And a great source of confusion I've observed over the years is the fact that we're using different vocabularies to describe the same activities and not thinking about which vocabulary we're using, especially as teachers. So think in terms of music vocabulary and guitar vocabulary. Music is about pitches, notes, time signatures and all sorts of things we talk about. Guitar is about strings, frets, issues on guitar that would mean nothing to a flute player. But if we talked about what we were doing in musical terms, we'd both know what we're talking about. Hardly sounds worth mentioning, but I've seen a lot of confusion arise around this in various situations. Now, for our first step, we're going to look at the guitar in a slightly different way. Instead of one 6-stringed instrument, let's think of it as 6 1-stringed instruments. All right? And we're just going to play one of them. And we're going to play the one that is the first string, just because you should try these ideas with all the individual strings, but for example, use the first string. And I'm plucking it. Can't see that with the camera set up here, but simple. I'm using a flat pick at the moment. Not advocating any sort of picking method, whatever you want to use. What I am advocating is that you be aware that you're already making decisions. How am I going to pluck the string? Flat pick, fingers and thumb, bare fingers, nails, how much nail, finger picks. In my workshops, I have a handout that has about 1.5 pages of ideas on various ways to pluck or sound a string. And it's not complete, but you get the point. I happen to be using a flat pick and 3 fingers and finger picks. That people call that hybrid picking. The finger pick part is a little more unusual with the flat pick. Like all approaches, it has its drawbacks, but it has some great benefits that I like a lot. So that's what I'm doing. You pluck in whatever way you want. Now we're going to fret a note, the next thing. And let's fret the 12th fret. I'm using my index finger, my left index finger. More decisions are being made. I've got 4 fingers to use. Which one? It's another decision you're making while you're playing. All these decisions are going on while you're trying to remember the lyrics and the chords and keep the beat going and are you loud enough and everything else, which is why, again, stripping down to these essential elements, we're just drawing these issues to mind. Now the 12th fret on the guitar vocabulary, and the open string are an octave apart, musical term. Guitar, it's the 12th fret. Musically, it's an octave up. It's an octave because the upper note beats at exactly twice the number of sound waves per second, which enters into yet another vocabulary, the whole issue of acoustics, which we don't talk about so much. We're using the tempered music system as opposed to just intonation. Both of those are worth looking up in a guitar or a music dictionary. When you look at a music dictionary, I would suggest that you always look askance at any rules that are laid out in that way. There are no rules in art. There's cause and effect. If you want a certain effect, you can learn how to achieve that. If enough people want that effect, suddenly it starts to look like a rule because everybody's talking about getting that effect. But if you don't want that effect, you wouldn't want to do that rule. And then once it's printed in a book, forget about it. You've handed over the keys and there you are. So no rules here. We've got the 12th fret. Now let's play the 6th fret. So we're playing the open string, 6th fret, and then the 12th fret. The open and the 12th are the same note an octave apart, so the only different note is that 6th fret note. So what we're playing is a 2-note scale. A scale is essentially a group of notes that extends until the first note is repeated. Be a way of describing a scale. Our standard scale system uses 7 notes out of the 12 available. The 12 frets of the guitar give us those 12 notes. But a 2-note scale is an interesting thing to think about and play with. What can you do with a 2-note scale? Can't play a chord. You can do some rhythm things with it, some dynamics things. You can even make a melody of one sort or another, especially in this age of electronica, when we do just that sort of thing a lot. We use a 5-note scale in blues and in a lot of kinds of music as well. But now let's go the other direction. Instead of being so limited in just a 2-note scale, let's play every single one of the notes. Now, if you can see, I'm using all 4 fingers of my left hand on the consecutive frets. When I get to my pinky, I hop up to the next fret back with my index finger. A decision I'm making, because I could, when I'm done with that pinky, slide the pinky up to the next note. I could use my ring finger or my middle finger or my index finger as we hop around to different positions, which are always referred to by what fret your first finger is residing over at that moment. So if my first finger's at the 5th fret, I'm in the 5th position. Pure guitar terminology. So I would suggest you play with this scale, 12-note scale, up and down, trying out different fingers. Try playing consecutively all the notes up and down, but consciously be thinking about what finger you're using next and how it feels and what it means when you make those choices. Now, musically speaking, we're playing a chromatic scale. Chromatic scale means all 12 notes in our music system. The alternative would be a diatonic scale, which is 7 select notes. We'll get to that later. There are a couple other options which we're going to address in a moment. The chromatic scale is a symmetrical scale because the distance between every single note in the scale is exactly the same. On the guitar, 1 fret. In musical terms, a minor second or a half step. All 3 of those things mean the same thing, sound-wise. The thing about a chromatic scale, one of the things anyway, is that there is no sense of home. There's no sense of direction. The pattern doesn't set up a form that makes us hear a note as being home, which diatonic scales do. But what we can do is artificially fabricate the sound of home, the note that just sounds like it's at rest. It will never be the same as a diatonic effect, but the mechanisms we use are also used in our diatonic system to create tonal centers and that sort of thing. Again, in my workshops, I have a couple of pages of ideas of how to make a note sound like home in a symmetrical scale. I'll just talk about a couple of them here. One is to play that note more than the other notes. Let's say the 5th fret. We want that note to sound like home. Also, if you play it first, our ear naturally gravitates towards the first sound it hears in a segment. So even playing it a few times, I used a little staccato, a little different attack on some of the notes there, and a more sustained hold on the home note. It's another way to draw attention to it. Rhythm also. Rhythm simply being when a note starts and stops. It's a definition of rhythm. Now, so far I'm only working from very close notes, close frets, to the home note. In music, that's called targeting. When you precede a given note by notes 1 or 2 frets away from it, it draws attention to that note, which is exactly what we're trying to do. Now, as you're playing with this, make sure that you include all 12 notes, all 12 frets, as you experiment, because otherwise your ear might start creating a diatonic sort of setup just by nature, because you're used to hearing that. But you hear how now the other notes kind of just all want to point back because of what I've been doing with that note. Other ways are to play it louder, maybe have it be the lowest note of the group of notes you're playing. That works well in particular because, again, our ear gravitates towards the lower notes as the foundation. Could try making it be the highest note you play. So those are some ideas. And when you're trying this, it's old knowledge, old wisdom in music that a metronome is useful. They're kind of boring though, but drum machines make great metronomes. Another very fun metronome that you don't hear about so often is a delay pedal, because it forces you into a ongoing rhythmic. Now let's just make a different note home. Let's make it the 7th fret. Top of everything else, that's fun. And fact is, at that point, you're improvising. Scary word, not so scary to do when you're playing that way. So just to finish off this session, I'll point out a couple other symmetrical scales that you can deal with in the same way that we've been talking here. One would be the whole tone scale, the musical term. On the guitar, it simply means every other fret. If I start on the open string, it's all the even frets and the open string. I'm stopping at an octave, which is 12, but all these things could go on further if they follow the same pattern. And we're getting a very strong feeling of that open octave note as home, because I started with it, because we're repeating it at the octave, another way to stress that note. Starts getting a little more of your attention when you're trying to make patterns only every other note, every other fret. And patterns are worthwhile. Create your own patterns. That'd be better than me making them up for you. You can be very mathematical about it and go every other note, or 3 in a row and then back 1, and 3 in a row and back 1, whatever. And however you're picking, be conscious of the patterns there too. If you're finger picking, choose a repeated finger pattern and try to keep that going, whether it coincides with the pattern in your left hand or not. And you quickly learn that things can already get really complicated and really fun to figure out and work out, and a great exercise. There are only 2 whole tone scales. On the guitar we could define them as the even numbered frets and the odd numbered frets. It's obvious there could only be those 2. And finally for today, the diminished scale, of which there are also 2. And it's sort of using fretwise elements of the 2 we just talked about. Now it'll be 2 adjacent frets and then skip 1. So 1 fret and then 2 frets, 1 fret and then 2 frets. And there are only 2 diminished scales, depending on if you start with 2 frets and then 1, 2 and then 1, or 1 and then 2, 1 and then 2. Very simple math here, but it starts getting very fun to work out patterns and be accurate with your intentions when you're breaking it. So our patterns are getting a little more complex. So I think we'll stop there for this session. That gives you plenty to work with. Try these different scales: chromatic, whole tone, diminished, on all 6 of your 1-stringed instruments. Being conscious of right hand patterns, left hand finger choices, which are patterns. You'll see they feel very differently, and of course sound differently on the different strings. Patterns are a very useful element to be thinking about. Music is all about patterns, and the guitar, of all instruments, couldn't be more blatantly pattern-oriented. It's a piece of graph paper on a stick. So patterns are our friend. Have fun with this, and I'll see you again soon. I do give workshops across the country. If you're interested in having me come to you with workshops, you can contact me at my website, GaryLeeJoyner.com, where you will also find links to Facebook, my blog, YouTube music tracks that show you the various ways I've put some of the things I talk about to use. So I hope to see you there. You can reach me through the website, and I'll see you here again soon.